Welcome, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Hamblett. I am the author of 7 Steps for Success, a pathway for students with disabilities, which I realize is appearing backwards. My apologies. Joining me today are my good friends, Jane Brown and Lorraine Wolf, who are college autism experts. If you want to see what they had to say about college autism programs, please read chapter 5 of my book. But they are here to share with you what they know, answer your questions. So Jane, why don't you start, just because we're going in alphabetical order, and tell everybody about yourself and who you are.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Well, I'm Jane Thierfeld Brown, so I'm only a little before Lori alphabetically with my T. I am the director of College Autism Spectrum. I am recently a former assistant clinical professor at Yale Child Study, and a little bit before that, I am the former director of student services at UConn Law School. I've been in disability services for 44 years, my goodness. And I right now am working mostly part-time doing college and autism work. I mostly work with families on college counseling. And I also am very part-time working for a school district near me. I'm in Connecticut. I work for the Farmington School District as their transition coordinator. And I have 3 kids, the youngest of whom is a 31-year-old who is autistic. Lori, go right ahead.
Thank you, Jane. It's always a joy to work with Jane, and we had a gap during COVID. So, I'm thrilled to be back doing this. I'm Lorraine Wolf. By training, I am a clinical neuropsychologist, and my specialty was children and adolescents with attention and psychiatric disabilities. I'm currently the director of Disability and Access Services at Boston University, where I also have a couple of faculty appointments in rehabilitation sciences and in psychiatry. And I'm what's called the ADA 504 compliance officer for the university, which means that I'm responsible for making sure that we comply with the law. Jane and I have been doing this work together for, 25 plus years. I am the proud parent of twins, 26-year-old twins, one of whom is on the autism spectrum. And that's sort of how Jane and I met to do this work, is a group of parents who had kids who were autistic, met online and started to study together. And those of us who persisted wound up working together for decades. And again, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Well, I mean, you are our go-to experts in the field. And so I'm really thrilled that you were here to answer questions from our families, because, I'm a learning disability specialist and there's only so much that I know, and you guys are the folks that know everything. And Lori, just an aside, I think of you as the parent of 2 sets of twins, both the boys and and those adorable pooches.
Yes. Yes, I have twin standard poodles.
Yes,
We're not joining this meeting. They're downstairs.
They are quite a pair. My pooch is in the kitchen, I hope, feeling very sad and left out. So anyway, for the folks on Zoom, if you can get your questions into the chat, I will be happy to pass them on to our ladies. One of the things I know we talked about in one of our conversations was how much change you have seen in what's happening for students with autism at college since your young people were even younger, and when you started this work as well. So why don't you talk a little bit about it?
I'll be happy to start that one. Well, first of all, my son did not go to college. He is what I believe the term now is severe profound autism. My son has an intellectual disability and autism. He has something called Fragile X syndrome, and he is very severe. He's mostly nonverbal, and he's in a day program for adults during the day. And so he has not been at college. Lori's son, of course, has. there's a lot of difference, mainly that I see when Lori and I started this, and we had been working together, I don't know, a year or two before this, but our first presentation to our national association, which is known as AHEAD, the Association on Higher Ed and Disability, we had a lot of people at our presentation. However, there were still people saying, Lori, Jane, people with autism can't go to college. You know, this was the late 90s, and people were still thinking that way. And now it still pleasantly surprises me some days when there rarely a day goes by that our listserv from our organization doesn't have some questions or comments about students with autism. So it has changed drastically from, gee, this isn't even possible, to, of course, we have students with autism, doesn't everybody? And I think that really is a massive change in culture. But it's also the same kind of culture that we saw. And again, I've just been doing this for too long. You know, people talked like that about learning disabilities. When I started in disability or access services in the 70s, people with learning disabilities couldn't go to college. People with ADD couldn't go to college, you know, that, so things have changed drastically. And Lori, go ahead.
Well, to echo Jane, Jane is conveniently forgetting the time that we were almost thrown out of a national level conference for talking about autism, and people got up and screamed at us that, you know, that this is a waste of resources, and how dare you, you know, promote this. So it really has changed a lot. When I go to visit other colleges, no longer have to do Autism 101, which we used to do, where we talked about symptoms and we talked about how to recognize students with autism. Now everybody is beyond that and ready to tackle the bigger pictures, like where does autism fit in the neurodivergence movement? How do we, you know, create programs and particularly job-geared programs for neurodivergent students. So that's really come far in, you know, it's been a while, it's been 25 years, but that's really quite a change.
Amazing.
Lori, do you want to take this first question? I'll read it to you. I'm interested in your thoughts on the necessity of the SAT or ACT right now for college-bound high schoolers with autism. I'm unsure whether to advise my son, who has Asperger's type of autism, to pursue it or not. He wants to go to college and is successful in general ed classes in high school.
Okay. Well, first of all, you know, let me applaud you for continuing to use the Asperger's type. And we could have a whole session on what happened with that word, but you know, it's a word that formed the identity of many young people. So, you know, not too many people are using it anymore, but thank you for using it because I like it. The SAT and ACT are becoming optional at many universities who recognize that, you know, it is a barrier for students who are first generation, who are from underrepresented groups, including students with disabilities. Some students do really well on this sort of test. So if it would enhance an application, I would say absolutely do it. If it is going to torture a young person to study and prep for it, or you're struggling to get accommodations for the exam, then I would say, you know, it might not be so important. You can take some practice exams. The student can take some practice exams, and you have the option with both of them not to release them to the schools that you're applying to. So there's kind of, you know, no commitment to trying it and seeing how it goes. But really, if it's torturing a young person, I would say find a test optional option.
I have a friend who's a college consultant who specializes in working with students with learning disabilities specifically, and said she had a parent who kept having her, I think the student was on their 6th administration of the SAT, ACT, and I just felt for that student. It's a lot.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jean, were you going to say something?
No, I was just agreeing with Lori. And I tell parents the same thing. If this is causing anxiety, why would you put your kid through it? There's no reason. If it's, I've had students say, oh, it doesn't bother me at all. I don't care about taking tests. That's fine. But if it does. So the next question, what's the best way to have a conversation with a parent who is afraid or nervous to consider college for her autistic son? I think, you know, there's something that Lori and I have been saying for over 20 years, you know, there is no one way to go to college. You can live at home and take a few courses at a community college. You can take a few classes online. If the parent is concerned about that student possibly living away from home, because that is a concern for a lot of people who's maybe chronologically the student is 17 or 18 or 19, but developmentally the student is more like 12 or 13 or 14. And they're just concerned safety-wise about that student living independently. Then absolutely, stay at home and go to a couple classes at the community college. Even some of our best and brightest students have started college that way. If the transportation is a barrier, then, it depends. Some people don't do well with online classes. I'm one of them. I really need the in-person. I'm okay doing these kinds of workshops, but an online class is really different. And some students thrive on that though, and they prefer it to having to go somewhere and do something in person. So I think, encouraging the parent not to hold their kid back from something that might be really successful for them. Because a lot of our students who are concerned about living on campus and doing the whole independence thing at college, they might not be any more independent working at a job. And so that's what's of concern. You don't want that person just sitting home after high school. And what I usually tell parents and the students is that's just not an option. As an adult, staying home and not being in school or working is not an option. So I think making sure the student knows it can be trade school, it can be community college, it can be a 4-year college or university near home. Lori, do you have anything to add to that one?
No, I really can't add anything except to perhaps prod a little bit gently to find out, what is the parent so nervous about? Is it the living independently? Is it the financial risk? Is it, separation and just having the chick fly from the nest? It could be legitimate that this is someone who couldn't even manage summer camp or a visit to grandma's, or it could be, a general feeling that this is an expensive risk.
Ladies, first of all, let me just pause for a minute and ask whoever has it handy, can you hold up your book for people so that they know? And I will attempt to put the link, Parents Guide for College for Students on the Autism Spectrum. You can get it from Amazon. I will attempt to put the link into the chat. If I fail to do that successfully, because I can't multitask, just email me or look it up. Thank you, Jane. And so a really, really valuable resource for you. But I actually would like to kind of jump a little bit on where you were going with this piece, because I think, for all parents, in my opinion, we should be thinking about having your student go to college as a leap of faith, right? They're going from our very supportive household, and this goes for neurotypical students as well as students with disabilities. And for those of you who are shaking your finger at me, I use disabilities because it's the Americans with Disabilities Act that covers your students at college, and I don't think it's anything to feel stigmatized about. So that's on me. Send your complaints to my website. But I mean that. I don't think saying somebody has a disability is a bad thing. So we had some questions ahead of time that I think coalesce with this, because and I know we talked about this, and if you want to look at my blog, there's a write-up of bonus content that didn't make it in my book from Jane and Lori. We talked about students being very academically successful, but that's not the only thing that's going to happen, that they're going to have to take care of at college. And so I had some questions, I think, when we were going to do the interview for the book, where folks asked things like, what are colleges doing in their residence halls to help students feel safe, comfortable, and integrated? What are tips on how to raise, dorm life with schools, and suggestions on what to request? So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this.
I do, and we've been working on that for many years. But I think it's important to remember that it's not the college's responsibility to make your kid comfortable. That's the main thing. And I know none of you want to hear that. You want it to be the college's responsibility. But the reality is, for any of you who also have neurotypical kids, it's not the college's responsibility to make your neurotypical kids comfortable. It's your students' responsibility to get out of their rooms, to find things they like to do. And yes, that's much harder for our folks on the spectrum. However, if you're concerned in that regard, then I would absolutely say you need to look at colleges that have programs for students with autism, because that's where those things are happening. That says we are a college that is concerned about this. We have a program, and because of that, we do things not only in the residence halls, but we do things socially on campus. We do mentoring. We do a lot of different things depending on the program. Our website, which we put at the beginning of the chat, collegeautismspectrum.com,
Put back in.
has a list by state. Thank you, Elizabeth. I keep it as up to date as humanly possible. I just changed 2 contact people last night. I'm sure that every once in a while you'll find a mistake, because there are now 80 programs. When Lori and I started this work, there were none. And 2 years later or so, in 2000, there was 1. In 23 years later, there's 80 programs, and I know of at least 5 that are hoping to start next week. Now, there's over 3,000 colleges and universities in the US, but I don't think narrowing that down to 80 is really a horrible thing. If your student's going to need that kind of oversight, then you want to be at a program, and you want to really look into the programs, because each one is very different. There's only 2 programs in the country that have housing specific to students with autism, St. Joe's in Philly and Mercyhurst in Erie, Pennsylvania. Both have housing that's specifically for students with autism. However, what many colleges have done is give an option for students to live on a certain floor or certain floors with an RA who has additional training about autism and who might act more as a mentor for the students. So there are a number of options and ways to go about this. Go ahead, Lauren.
Well, a couple things. First of all, I thank you for promoting our book, Elizabeth. While we were waiting for this to start, Jane and I agreed that it's time to do an update on that book. So watch for that. There are a number of things that need to be updated, and one of those is sort of residential life in 2023 is very different than it was when we wrote that book. Coming back from the pandemic, just about every student living in a residence hall has brought an anxiety disorder, either diagnosed or not diagnosed. So working with students in the residence, all students, to promote engagement and belonging, and try to get everybody out of their rooms and into socializing is a huge thrust on most campuses right now. The students came back wanting to isolate in their rooms, not wanting to engage with their peers, looking, frankly, a little autistic. And so we're all looking at that. How do we work with a large group of students? I support everything that Jane said. The website, College Autism Spectrum, specifically excluded the for-profit programs.
Right.
We don't want to promote a program that tags additional $70,000 on top of college room and board. We don't think that's something we want to endorse. And to think about things like, how would a student thrive in a residence hall? Finding a program, or if a student wouldn't thrive in a residence hall, finding a commuter campus. We always come back to that, is that there are lots of different ways to go to school.
I also want to add, there's a couple of lists out there, and they're big lists that have more than just the autism programs. So just when you're using some of those other lists that you may be sent, please just be careful of what the programs entail. Some of the other lists include ID programs, programs for students with intellectual disabilities and autism. Some of them include, 2 or 3 week programs and 1 semester programs, that just anything that would deal with a specialization for someone with an autism spectrum issue. Our list, Lori and I decided long ago that we were trying to put together something just for degree seeking students, because that seemed to be ignored in a lot of other places. So this is for, and before getting into those programs, you have to first get into the college or university. So you apply to the university and wait to hear about your acceptance, and then you apply to the program. So can I go backwards a minute, Elizabeth?
Of course, please.
With what we were talking about on campus, someone said, I'm worried, confession, I'm worried about all of the above, the things that Lori listed and the leap of faith. What I was going to say when we started, because I'm often asked, what's the most important thing you can do in high school for your autistic student to get them ready for college? And I always answer in the same way, to help them become as independent as possible. And often, and I myself was like this, Lori, please answer after if you were too. I was like this. I so wanted to help my kid be successful that I did some things that I should have backed off on years before, because I didn't want him to fail. And so what I realized is that the independence he could have created was infinitely more important. And since I've learned that, I've been working on that very hard. And of course, he's probably different than most of you that are representing students here today, because you're thinking about college. But independence is really the most important thing. So if tomorrow morning you're looking at your sons or daughters or your grandchildren or nieces and nephews and saying, do you have your homework? Do you remember you have a dentist appointment after school? Do you remember that you have a test today? Don't forget before that you have to meet with counselor so-and-so. And that needs to stop. It needs to stop tomorrow. And you need to start figuring out how to teach your student, even if they're in 8th or 9th grade, how to teach them to be able to do that themselves. That is the number one thing that's going to make them successful, not just in college, but in adult life. Lori, go ahead.
One of the things that I did, and I took notes from Jane, because her daughters were applying to school well before my sons. I made them independent in the application process. I never saw their application essays. I looked over the list of schools that they came up with, and there were a few that I vetoed, but I pretty much gave them a lot of independence in that process. We also insisted that they have a job at school, that, that some sort of employment was an important part of rounding out their experience. So, trying to send an independent young person who knows how to fill their prescriptions, who knows how to make an appointment, who knows how to talk to a doctor, who knows how to navigate mass transportation, is really important, and something that we can do in high school while the student is relatively safe, and the consequences of not being able to do it well are lower. And then that way, that reduces some of that panic of I'm sending them off into the great unknown and they can't take care of themselves.
So for a parent who says, but ladies, we're in this place already where my student has had some, rough experiences because of their challenges with executive functioning, et cetera, so on. And I'm just, and I mean this sincerely, and I'm so worried about what will happen to them if I don't do that stuff for them. What if they failed, the class because they never turned their paper in? What if they fail the class, they don't get to the dentist because I didn't remind them? So, how do we respond to that?
I know how I do.
I think we're on the same page, and it's going to sound really harsh for what we, for that we apologize, but that's the truth. That's a young person who's never going to leave lunch from your house. Mm-hmm. That's someone who's going to graduate from college with no usable skills and is not going to be ready for competitive employment, which is, an all too frequent path, even for students who are ready for competitive employment. So, I take a kind of a hard line on this.
I agree. I think it's, the other part that you need to know is you're not going to change things in a week or even a semester. And sorry, Lori and I think in terms of semesters, we're higher ed folks. So it's taken your family and your student 15, 16, 17 years to get to this point. You're not going to change it overnight, but instead of looking at this like, oh my gosh, I can't do this, instead looking at it as, okay, we're going to do one thing a month. We're going to add, this month, he's going to call to order the pizza, even if someone he doesn't know answers the phone. He's going to order a pizza, and then he'll be able to do it independently. He's going to make his appointments. When you think about it, once your students at college, if they need to make an appointment with Lori or I, chances are just walking into the office and saying they need to meet with us isn't going to work. I mean, that's pretty rare nowadays that we would be free to see someone who just happened to walk in the door. You have to make an appointment. Well, a parent calling and saying, I need to make an appointment for my son, he needs to see Lori this week, is not going to work. If your student needs to see Lori, the student needs to make an appointment. So all those things happening one at a time now. And if you're saying, well, but my kid's a senior, I don't have time, do what you can before they go off to college. Doing their own laundry, having a few chores at home. And believe me, we fought that battle for many years, but that's all very important stuff that students need when they go off to college, whether they're living in a single by themselves or if they're living with a roommate, which I'm sure people will have questions about and we can ask.
Yeah, and I want to get to that in a minute, but there's some questions I had again ahead of time. Kind of coalesces with all of this stuff. A parent was saying, is anybody going to pair them with roommates that can help them with the basic mom reminders? This is a student who had, a one-on-one aide in high school and needed to be prompted. Their school was all on computers, to not use screen time when it wasn't appropriate. Remembering to get the alarm clock up, remembering to eat because that student didn't listen to their body. So, first of all, I assume that in your book, parents can learn how to prepare for this, right? But when we're looking at that level of support from adults, and you two have both been disability services directors too. Can you talk about, so I'm sorry, I've asked you like 5 questions. So let's start with is anybody at school going to help them with the reminders, the food, the waking up? And then also, how do you deal with parents who are very often accustomed to being at those meetings and speaking for their student? I had a question today, in my Facebook group about, the parent was at a meeting and the disability services person wanted the student to provide their history and was upset that the parent was contributing that. And so pick it up wherever. Sorry.
Jane, let me take the pieces that I remember out of that part question.
Sorry, I'll forget I asked anyway.
Go ahead.
Let me take the parent in the meeting part. It's important as disability services people working with parents who have kids who are autistic to forge an alliance and remind the parent that we have the same goal, which is to launch a young person who's ready for competitive employment and gets a job. And when the parent interferes with that process by coming to meetings, speaking for their student, interfering with faculty members, they're working against that goal. So kind of clarifying that and clarifying roles. This is what I do. This is what you do. This is how I will work with you. And this is how I won't work with you. I've thrown parents out of meetings where they haven't been able to, conform to some basic rules about, I want to hear from your young person. I know you have a lot to share and I will ask you for information, but right now I need to build a relationship with a young person who doesn't trust me either. So building that relationship, building that trust, eventually coming to a place where a parent realizes we'll reach out to you when we need you. Don't worry about that, but you can't do all the work for your student. It just doesn't work that way. Procedurally in process, it doesn't work that way, but also, realistically, when a parent interferes in the process, the student is the one who pays the price. And that, so kind of making that clear is important. I heard about a service which is available at some schools pre-pandemic. I don't know if it survived the pandemic, but there are actually people who are college concierges who wealthy families can engage to do all that mom stuff. I think that's a horrible idea, and for the reasons that we've talked about this afternoon. But Jane, maybe you want to talk about the roommate issue and the can't they pick somebody nice who will also remind him to take his meds? And I don't mean to make light of that, because those
No,
are
I know.
the questions that we've gotten. It's
Yeah.
not a joke.
No, we get that question all the time. Can you help? Can you find the roommate that's really going to help him have a good college experience or help her? And the reality is that other person is paying their tuition to be a college student, not to be the mom. We can't ask someone, and we wouldn't. That's also what's considered personal service. The important thing to know as a basis is that the laws that govern higher education and disability accommodations are drastically different than the high school laws, the K through 12 or even up through 21. One is under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which you're all familiar with, and one's under ADA and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. The former IDEA is a federal law of entitlement. Your kids are all entitled to a free and appropriate public education, and that the program has to fit the child. Once you've got that high school diploma, those laws change, and it's no longer federal law of entitlement, it's civil rights statute of eligibility. And if you can't do all those things like get yourself to class and be able to not be disruptive in a class, if you can't get any of your work in, then unfortunately, you're not qualified to be there. The good news is that, especially with our folks on the spectrum, a few years can make an enormous difference in developmental growth. So perhaps some of your students are not ready at 18 and they need to stay in district in a transition program, but they may be ready at 19, 20, or 21. Lori and I have seen amazing success from students who just weren't ready when they graduated from high school, but they took a few years to work on those independent living skills and some of those work skills. And suddenly at 21, they could be incredibly successful at college. So who are we not to give those students the gift of time and let them? I know, believe me, I had one of those kids that didn't learn to drive, didn't go to the prom, didn't graduate, all of those things. I know how hard it is to watch all the neighbors and friends' kids go through that. And, we felt it and we still feel it on lots of things, as now all of his peers are getting, well, they weren't really his peers, but the kids that he originally went to school with, they're all getting married and having kids. You're on a different path, and you have to allow your kids that opportunity to mature into who they're going to be. And if we're trying to make them like the other kids who are similar chronological age, it's not going to work. So yes, you can hire one of those concierge services. I would want you to think about not only the cost, because that's, if you can afford it, that's one thing, but how is that going to make your kid appear to everyone else? And is your kid going to have any social relationships when they're the one that has somebody coming to wake them up in the morning, someone to make sure they've got their homework done, someone to make sure they're, basically having a mom on campus or a virtual mom? That's going to somewhat make your kid a social pariah. And you really want to think about, is my kid ready to be at school, or am I better off having them home and going to a commuter campus for a few years?
And I think I had, one of my favorite quotes from the book is one of the consultants I interviewed said, going to college is not binary. It's not either you do or you don't, right? There are lots of different ways to go to college. There are lots of different times to go to college. And I am empathetic to parents, many of us, not everybody, though, would like for their kids to be on track with their, their peers, their graduating class. But, the more we learn about the brain, honestly, I was just having this conversation. Now that we know that the brain's not done, and Lori's the neuropsychologist, really cooking until 25, we should probably not let anybody go to college, frankly, until they're around 2021, but we're not doing it that way. And there was a question there, because while we're talking about, the overall preparation too, I think we should drill down a little bit on the academics, ladies. I had seen a question in here The parents said that the student, are there schools that gear coursework or grading around learning and mastering topics over rote quizzing and testing, which is difficult for my student?
Well,
Um,
go ahead, Lori.
Sure. And then, the question just above that, I think, is an important one to circle back to about the accommodations and the logistics of what, where, and how. But yeah, there are schools that, are based on portfolio assessment and experiential learning. You have to dig around. Many of those are the smaller, what we called in my day, hippie schools. Schools that have different grading systems. I am a proud Hampshire College alum from the founding classes. So we had no grades, we had no tests. And there are still some schools that operate like that. They're fewer and farther between. They tend to be small, which is good for some students and not good for others. When you're at a small campus and you're an autistic student, you might stand out as the only atypical student on that campus, as opposed to a larger campus where there are more peers. But you certainly can find those schools. I would also be careful in making sure that the schools are accredited by their state accreditation guidelines. Many of these smaller, quote unquote, experimental schools lost their accreditation, but they still cost as much as if they were accredited. So check that.
I would add a couple of schools. Landmark College in Putney, Vermont, really gears, they historically were a school for students with learning disabilities, and they now have broadened that to learning disabilities and autism. And so they really focus on just the kinds of things you're saying, how to make a student, how to have them master the information more. They can build their curriculum differently because they're a very specialized school. The other, what's the one in Florida, Lori? Is it Beacon College? Yeah, Beacon. Beacon is similar. Now, again, historically, Beacon was looking much more at LD and said they would not accept students with autism, but they've since changed their mind, like Landmark, because there's so many more students with autism coming forward. So a specialized kind of school besides a specialized program can also help tremendously.
And I want to loop in a point that Jane made earlier for those who are watching this later on and who may not be aware of this. As we talked about, IDEA does not apply at the college level. We're under ADA and Section 504 Subpart E. And they're vastly different laws than IDEA. And one of the things that we say in our field all the time is that many of us at the college level see ADA and 504 as telling colleges we have to provide access to our programs, and IDEA being more of a success-oriented rule. And so when it comes to the academics, as we're talking about students who have difficulty taking quizzes and tests, modifications are something that are not commonly approved at the college level. And so sometimes, and ladies, you may have more specific examples that you're aware of, but things like being able to rewrite a paper or take a test over again until you get the grade that satisfies you. Taking a multiple choice test where there were fewer answers, or not having to take a multiple choice test. So do you ladies want to speak to some examples you may have come across that families should be aware of?
Go ahead, Lori. I'll let you.
Well, something like writing a paper instead of taking a test.
Right.
As an accommodation.
Yeah.
Waiving or modifying courses that a
Mhm.
student would struggle with, such as usually math and foreign language. Reducing the number of credit hours necessary to graduate. I had that one recently.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And we are advocates for our students, but we're also agents for our universities. And so part of what we do is to make sure that the academic standards and degree requirements aren't compromised by any kind of accommodations that we make. So that's very different from anything that anyone has experienced in K through 12, where they will remake a program in order to foster success in a child. We aren't able to do that in colleges and universities.
One of the things that struck me, and this is my second year, I believe, working in the high school as their transition consultant, is sitting in on some of these IEPs when they're going over accommodations. And at the end, I'll say, I just want to remind the family that of these accommodations that have been approved at this meeting, here's what won't be allowed at college, and going through those and saying, we want to rethink that in order to get this student ready for the post-high school? Because some of it is just, the one-to-one aid and those kinds of things, that to the point that there are some autism programs in the country that on the application, they're now saying, if you've required a one-to-one aid anytime in the last 2 years of high school, you are not appropriate for this program.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Even for a college autism program.
Oh, yeah, because they're saying, we're still, you have to be able to live independently and make it around campus independently. And if you needed an aid to do all that, we can't provide the appropriate level of service you're going to require. And I think they're better off saying that than have a family make the plan to come and the student not be able to be successful. And increasingly, programs are saying that. So I would, one of the things I tell families, if by junior year your student really doesn't need the aid, you're just keeping it because you don't want to take the chance, I would go without the aid. If the student really doesn't need it, because you want them to know that they can function without adult supervision constantly by their side, and you want them to have some experience at that. Lori, I do want to address the accommodation question. Here, I'll read it to you. How do we start the accommodations conversation with a prospective university during the application process, after acceptance? Since IEPs do not follow our students to college, what type of paperwork should we plan to present? I'm glad they said
Yes, I hope it's somebody who's read my work or your work.
Can I also add the 504 doesn't follow
right
either.
Yes.
Everybody thinks it does. It does not.
I know it's in step 1 of my book. Where is it in your book, ladies? So everybody needs to know which chapter.
This is a great and a really centering question, because Audrey, thank you for the question, mentioned prospective universities. Let's start at the beginning. Jane and I are strong proponents of checking out every single college that your student might be applying to by calling the disability office and asking about, experience with autism. Do you have a program? Can we come visit? If it's local enough, can you go and meet the people that the student would be working with? So, starting right there and saying, what documentation are you going to look for? And, making sure that you can get that documentation. If the student has also had a psychiatric condition along with autism, can you get documentation of that? Can you, make sure that you are able to give that program what they're looking for? So it's very important, and nobody will turn you down. We're all interested in recruiting students who are, diverse now. So there are big pushes on campus. So nobody is going to say, well, I can't talk to you about, a prospective student. That might be a little bit different once the student has been accepted and is actually in the school, is a different relationship, but nobody's going to turn down a prospective student inquiry interview. If possible, the student should be part of that, to have a look at the school, either virtually or in person, again, if it's feasible. We traveled extensively with our kids within the United States anyway. I was doing a lot of speaking, and I often took the kids with me. And if we were in a different city, we just drove through schools so that they could get a feel for what a big school, a small school, a rural school. Sometimes we stopped and talked to people. But that kind of preparation is important. Once a student has applied, unless they're applying to a program, a specific autism program that has a separate application process, the documentation does not go. The disclosure of disability is usually not part of the application process.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, the people who are going to be reading that application are not disability experts. They don't know. They wouldn't know how to interpret it if they looked at a report. And if they're on their game, they will send it back to you, or perhaps forward it on to the disability office, who will return it to you and say, good luck, please contact me when you've been accepted. So once a student's been accepted, is the time to start that conversation. We are deep in that cycle right now at my university, because most of the acceptances, have gone out, and students are making their decisions. So we're very deep in that. Well, if I came to BU, what accommodations might I get? What would I have to show you in terms of diagnosis and documentation? So ask all those questions, and don't be afraid that if you ask those questions, it is going to come back and hit you because of the fear that, well, if they know, they won't let them in. When you have a conversation with me, I don't have a pipeline to admissions. I don't call up and say, hey, I just heard about a student who's autistic, don't let them in. On the same token, I can't call up and say, I just had an interview with a great student, absolutely let them in. They're separate processes. So it's important to keep that in mind. But your point of contact will always be the disability office at that school or college.
Right, please don't call admissions and ask them questions, and not for any other reason, but that they may not have any idea, but that won't necessarily stop them from saying stuff. So it's really important to go to the source. And actually, I would like to have you address one thing that comes up every once in a while that it pains me, that it worries families, that once a student gets in and registers, so enrolls at BU or UConn, wherever, and then registers with the office, they're going to look at that student's paperwork and rescind their admission.
No.
I know it pains me that people worry about that. I know.
Yeah, no, that pains me too. That's blatantly against the law.
It would be very against the law.
Yeah, I know.
Acceptances are rescinded when students behave badly between acceptance and matriculation. And that can be, 6 or 9 months or sometimes longer. So, that's when admission is rescinded, but not because they found out that a student is disabled. And if any school did that, I would say contact a lawyer.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I do want to comment, Kathleen responded about having her son take one class the first semester at community college, then 2, then 3, then 4. He built mastery in academics and time management and social skills. He is now 24 and finishing community college with a seamless transition into our state university. Yay, Kathleen, that's exactly it.
Your son.
Oh, that's perfect. That's exactly what your student needed, and good for him for going to get it. That is wonderful. And we'll all cheer at his commencement from community college, and hopefully in a few years from the state university. And doing it that way, he may at some point be ready to move onto campus at the state university, and he may really enjoy that expanded social life. You have to really look at what kind of social opportunities have your sons and daughters had through high school, and would going onto a college campus expand those social opportunities or overwhelm the student? And for a lot of folks, it's overwhelming, and then going to a commuter campus is much better.
Yeah.
So,
And
let me just build on that a little bit. And Jane and I have had parents who've come up and accused us of saying, well, you're promoting community college or commuter college, and you're saying that our kids aren't good enough to go to Harvard or to go to Boston University. And nothing could be farther from the truth. We're saying that looking at your young adult and being realistic about what are they ready for at each stage of the process, throwing them in the deep end of a four-year live away high pressure university is risky. And some students are up to it and some are not. Nothing is more heartbreaking than a student who washes out after the first semester because they don't come back. And so it's really it's getting your young person ready to go to a 4-year live away high stakes university or not, but not assuming that that's the only way that that they should go.
And we don't know where all the participants today are from. I know that the lack of some respect for community colleges is rampant in the Northeast. It's not necessarily that way in other parts of the country, where almost everybody goes to community college for a couple years and then goes to campus. It's more unusual to go away to a college sometimes, because often those 2 years of community college are paid for by the state. And if they are, why would somebody pay for their kid to live on a campus when they can get those 2 years for free? But yeah, I'm a huge proponent of community college. And for a lot of our students, doing something called dual enrollment. So that last year of high school, taking at least one course, sometimes one each semester, one in the fall, one in the spring, at the local community college, that can then fulfill some of the high school requirements, but also get students much more ready to what it's like to be at a college, and the difference in the kinds of services and the difference of what they're responsible for versus what somebody else took care of while they were in high school. It can be really helpful for students.
And just to wrap this up, and could you just hold that book up one more time for people who joined late? This is Jane Thierfeld Brown and Lorraine Wolf, who are co-authors of The Parent's Guide for College, for students to college, for students.
Yeah.
Trying again. Parent's Guide for College to college for students on the autism spectrum. Sorry.
Not a catchy title,
It
Elizabeth.
is.
We'll come up with a
It's
catchy
user
word.
error.
We're
So
also going to get rid of the blue puzzle piece.
okay, and you're
Because,
right.
you know,
Right.
who
Right.
knew
Right.
what would happen
Yeah.
with that image.
So buy the book, because you can get hear a lot more from Jane and Lori and from their colleagues who were co-authors on this book. Don't forget collegeautismspectrum.com, their website, and you can connect with them around consulting. But there was one last question. I think it dovetails nicely into this conversation about sometimes steps to full enrollment at a four-year college being the thing. Any suggestions on readiness?
There are a couple of assessments, if you will. They're not scientifically proven by any means, but there is a fairly good one on the Landmark College website that kind of goes through a whole bunch of questions asking if your student is ready for college. There's also one that I really like on, okay, I got to get it right. It's on beingwell.com. I used to call it wellbeing.com, but beingwell.com. And there's two assessments. One is, am I ready for college? And the other is my child ready for college? So the parents can fill one out and the student can fill one out. Yeah, if I got that wrong and it's not being well, try and reverse it, wellbeing.com, but I'm pretty sure it's beingwell.com.
Yeah.
Sorry, I should.
Yeah, there are those, and there's also listening and talking to your student and exploring together what are your joint concerns. My favorite story about my son is when he was sitting in the backseat of the car, because don't we learn more from our kids when they're sitting in the backseat of the car than face to face? And he said to me, "Mom, I'm really worried about college because I don't know how I'm going to eat."
It's my favorite story. I love that.
We had driven around colleges. We hadn't actually gone into the dining halls, and he didn't realize. He thought that he had to buy and meal prep and cook all of his food. And he said, "And I don't have any money and I don't know how to cook." And so the first thing that I did was I took him into a dining hall and I showed him, no, this is exactly what you know how to do. You go through with a tray, you choose your food, you know how to do this. And once he realized that, a lot of his concerns about going away to school on that front went away. We had lots of other similar conversations, but I love that one because it had never occurred to me. When he said, "I'm worried about school," my brain went to peer pressure and being rejected and, going on dates and would the academics be too hard? I never thought it had to do with how is he going to eat at a very basic level.
I do love that story, Lori, especially because you're a higher ed professional and had been for years before then, but that never would have entered anybody's mind, so that often we really just, you're absolutely right. That was so well said. talk to the student, see what they're really concerned about, or what's holding them back, or what's pushing them forward.
I think that's amazing advice. So with that, I think I think we've pretty much gotten to everything here, but if you have any further questions, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can contact these ladies at collegeautismspectrum.com. It's an easy one to remember. Ladies, any last thoughts you want to leave people with?
Well, I just want to give a shout out to the person who said that their son is exploring study abroad. My autistic son went on more study abroads than semesters at his college and is now living abroad. So yes, it's absolutely possible.
And I just want to say, try as hard as you can to let go of some of the anxiety and enjoy the journey. I mean, it's wonderful to think your kids are doing something that typical kids do, go to college. So why not enjoy and just find the right place, but enjoy this whole process rather than being so anxious about it? Because whether we talk about our anxiety or not, our kids feel that from us. And if you're anxious about it, your kid is going to be anxious. So try and let go of some of the anxiety, not only for your own health, but for your kid. And thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks for having us. It was so much fun to work with Lori.
Yes, always.
Are you kidding? Thank you for doing this. I mean, you guys, as I started by saying, are the go-to experts, and it's so lovely and generous of you to give your time in this way. So thanks everybody for joining us. If your friends missed it, it'll be up on my YouTube channel at some point this week. But contact these ladies, find their book, and take it all in, take a deep breath, take it all in, and figure out what the next step is that makes sense for your student, because there's lots of different ways for this to happen. And the more that we work toward our students' independence, just the better everything's going to be for them. All right, everybody, have a good one. Thanks so much.
Thank you.